Exact acum un an, Rusia invada Ucraina, ceea ce era numit operațiunea specială. Un război care a schimbat complet economia globală. Europa a descoperit că gazul rusesc a devenit armă în mâinile lui Putin și a redus dependența de la 57% la sub 20%. România depinde de gazul rusesc în proporție de doar 15%, iar cu resursele din Marea Neagră România poate deveni un jucător important pe piața de energie. Germania, cel mai mare importator european de gaz rusesc, a accelerat construirea de terminale de GNL. Importurile de petrol rusesc pe mare în Uniunea Europeană au fost interzise. Blocul comunitar și țările G7 au instituit un plafon de preț pe petrolul rusesc, dar conflictul din Ucraina a accelerat și tranziția către energie regenerabilă la nivel global.
In 2022, the world got a little bit lucky. There was a comparatively mild winter, which meant that the energy demands weren't as high as they could have been. The world dodged a bullet to some extent in that some of the most negative effects that could have transpired.
The fear of not being able to meet our energy demands has really implied an enormous effort both to diversify, so find providers elsewhere, and speed up the energy transition. Now, the first is not necessarily part of the green transition because we're still consuming fuels that are not renewable. But the second is, and you really see that the investments and that are made in the European Union, but also worldwide, are really being accelerated.
Un an de război în Ucraina a dus și la o criză alimentară. Cerealele ucrainene au rămas în porturi până când Turcia a reușit să negocieze un coridor pentru navele cu cereale în Marea Neagră. Infrastructura portoară și de transport din România face față cu greu cerealelor venite din Ucraina. India nu a reușit să umple golul. După ce un val de căldură record a micșorat producția și guvernul a interzis exporturile, țări care tradițional importau din Rusia și Ucraina s-au orientat către producători din alte colțuri ale lumii, iar poziția Rusiei de furnizor global de fertilizatori a devenit un risc în noul context geopolitic.
The impact of the war that hasn't even been fully realized is the impact on fertilizers. So you both had a lack of exports from Russia and Belarus, as well as the impact on natural gas supplies to Europe, causing a big spike in cost of producing fertilizers. So there were those stories that nearly 70% of fertilizer production in Europe at one point was shut down. But the main point is that you had this huge spike in fertilizer prices globally, and that's going to impact fertilizer usage for this season. Another example of a change in policy was China importing corn from Brazil. They hadn't ever previously imported corn from Brazil. They had imported from the Ukraine and the US. And when the Ukraine was cut off from them, they panicked and they've become a structural, very large importer of corn.
Nici industria de apărare nu a fost pregătită de un conflict atât de solicitant. Cele 8500 de lansatoare Javelin trimise de Statele Unite Ucrainei reprezintă producția pe 4 ani. Țările europene iau în calcul creșterea producției de material militar și regândesc strategiile cu privire la cum se pot adapta dacă vor fi implicate direct într-un conflict. Iar țări care importau masiv tehnică militară rusească își caută alți furnizori.
For the United States as well as European allies to really ramp up production of defense materials, from full-fledged systems to ammunition. That capacity is actually not there right now. And what we're seeing is considerable strain in the U.S. defense industrial base in terms of being able to really produce the kinds of systems and materials that the U.S. military would need in a conflict of its own, for example. So that would have significant implications for Ukraine's ability to defend itself, particularly given the state of Europe's defense industrial base, which is probably in an even more precarious position than that of the United States. A lot of countries around the world that were buying Russian military equipment, I think they'll be looking to other sources because so far the performance of the Russian military and its military equipment has not been particularly impressive.
Europa a învățat pe propria piele că legăturile economice pot fi transformate în arme. Peste 1000 de companii și-au suspendat activitatea sau au ieșit din Rusia. Lanțurile de aprovizionare cu materii prime rusești au fost serios perturbate. Lumea a descoperit că anumite industrii trebuie incluse în lista celor strategice, iar sancțiunile împotriva mașinăriei de război a lui Putin nu au fost atât de eficiente pe cât era de așteptat.
You probably won't necessarily see mass movements of existing production, but you might see diversion of where new factories were going to get built or expansions are going to go. Just because the cost involved in moving some of this stuff is staggeringly high. It depends on the types of production you're looking at. So already several industries have been identified as particularly strategically important. So semiconductors. It is very clear that the US and the EU are going to throw considerable resources and regulatory muscle behind trying to make sure that they have localized strength in semiconductor manufacturing.
The number of countries that is actually not necessarily against Russia when it comes to the war issue is actually quite big. In population terms, it is only 35% of world population that is actually sanctioning Russia. The rest is either neutral or is even with Russia. Now, this is important as far as the effectiveness of sanction is concerned, because the potential for sanctions leakage, namely trying to help Russia to bypass the sanction, is actually quite big.
Economia Rusiei a trecut de la o creștere de 3% înainte de război la o contracție de 3,5% în primele 9 luni de război. Rusia a cheltuit 82 de miliarde de dolari, în condițiile în care PIB-ul Rusiei este echivalent cu cel al Spaniei, iar PIB-ul per capita este mult mai mic decât în cazul României, dar costurile pe termen mediu și lung sunt greu de calculat.
There used to be an aphorism in international trade that no two countries in the world with a McDonald's have ever gone to war with each other. This was like one of these cliches in international relations. Well, I've eaten at the McDonald's in Kiev and I've eaten at the one in Moscow, so we could park that one.